Kia ora.
The Honourable Peter Dunne.
Madam Speaker, there are three great cycles in New Zealand politics. Stagnation gives way to reform, reform gives way to consolidation, and then the process starts all over again. After the great reforms of the 80s and 90s and the consolidation that's occurred over the last decade, we now stand at the brink, whether we move forward or whether we revert to that cycle and a process of stagnation sets in. And despite the speeches today, the essential problem that this country has long since confronted remains. We are a small, moderately resource-endowed, commodity-based trading economy at the end of the world. Globalisation and the loss of guaranteed markets and the freer mobility of peoples have made our problems that much greater and our task that much harder to address. And so if we are to survive, let alone prosper, we need to develop a new distinctive. More of the same isn't going to be good enough. We've got to start to live what we've spoken of for years and become one of the truly smart nations, because doing over again what we've done in the past is simply a recipe for stagnation. All around us, we see other countries moving to be smarter and brighter. It's no coincidence that Tony Blair was elected in Britain a decade ago on the basis of an education revolution, and a decade later Kevin Rudd promotes the same opportunities for Australia. And yet when we look at the challenges confronting New Zealand and hear the responses put forward, it's a pretty sorry story. The two main alternatives presented today were, on the one hand, a list of very worthy and detailed programs, and on the other, a litany of negative criticism. There's no future for New Zealand moving forward if either of those options is, to quote the phrase that both quoted about each other, as good as it gets. Because what this country needs is the chance to lift its game, to reassert some of the things that we spoke of when we all eulogised Sir Edmund Hillary, some of those unique Kiwi characteristics and values, and apply them to the management and the governance of our nation. And this country is a unique mix of peoples. The previous speaker touched on that to some extent. And the strength we have and the opportunity we have as we start to face the challenges of the more modern economy of the 21st century is to draw from that uniqueness and that strength and then develop solutions that give effect to that. We talk a lot about sustainability. Well, Madam Speaker, I suggest that if we focused our policies on what's good for the parents of our country, the families and the communities of our country, we would automatically move to what was sustainable, because we would be facing a situation where our development was community-focused, bottom-up rather than top-down imposed. If we really want to deal with dysfunction and disadvantage, we focus on the points where it is occurring and deal with those situations rather than stand back and either impose broad brush programs that are so broad as to be meaningless, or tut-tut out of fear and do nothing, lest we be accused of scapegoating the very people we are seeking to help. Madam Speaker, there's one area I want to talk about today because I think it provides us with a way forward to capture some of the feeling that I've spoken of. We need, as I've said, a renewed sense of optimism about who we are. And that will come, I believe, if we start to talk about the sort of country we want to be moving forward and the type of changes that we need to make to give effect to that. And that is why I, for one, and UnitedFuture as a party, is not afraid to confront the issue of our future constitutional arrangements. I get frustrated every time the issue is raised. People say, oh yes, yes, but not now. It's not the right time. That will take care of itself. We are supposedly proud and bold and confident about ourselves, but we're scared stiff of engendering any national debate about our constitutional arrangements going forward. And yet, if we were to undertake that process, if we were to do what the Select Committee that I chaired 2 or 3 years ago recommended and establish a public education process on constitutional issues, put together a series of proposals relating to whether we become a republic or not, whether we have a written constitution, where and how the Treaty of Waitangi principles ought to be accommodated, and a range of other constitutional issues, then I think a couple of things might just happen. Firstly, New Zealanders would become more engaged in talking about themselves, their countries and their futures, and what their expectations are of why they want to be here and what makes us different from some other place. We lament the fact that our kids all go overseas and we say, oh, it's the cost of education, or they can't get a job here, or some other reason as to why they don't come back. And yet New Zealanders overseas are proud of being New Zealanders and would desperately want to be here. So let us start to create some opportunities. Let us work towards having a referendum on those matters during the term of the next Parliament, so that changes can then be put in place for the Parliament that follows and for subsequent elections. Having a focus and a cause like that brings us back to the basics of what this country's future is all about. Will focus us again on the great economic and social issues that we need to confront, and will give us a framework within which we can start to consider them. At the moment, what we have, as this debate this afternoon has typified, is a series of sectional interests from all sectors of the House promoted in a vacuum. We think you should do more of this, no, we think you should do more of that, and so on and so forth. There is no coherent overarching strategy or plan. There's certainly not any vision about the type of country we want to become. And yet, when a great figure like Sir Edmund Hillary dies, we can all acknowledge his uniqueness as a New Zealander as being one of the factors that made him great. But we don't make the translation of those skills, those attributes and those values to our nation as a whole. Just imagine what we could achieve if we were a nation of Hillarys, or a nation of Rutherfords, or Peter Jacksons, or whoever the contemporary icon might be. All those unique Kiwi skills have occurred because they are New Zealanders, because New Zealand has nurtured and embraced them. And I think what we ought to be doing, as we focus this election year on our hopes and our aspirations for our country, is starting to talk much more about those values, what they can contribute to the potential of this country. Because at the end of the day, whatever we do, whoever wins, whoever forms the government of this country, that challenge I posed right at the beginning will still remain. We're small, we're isolated, we're at the end of the trade routes, we're generally a price taker, not a price maker. We have to do the best in circumstances that are unfailingly adverse to us. And more of the same, and more of just trying to play the game we used to do because it was safe, will not be enough. We had a Knowledge Wave conference here a few years ago that was supposed to unlock the key to the future. What happened? Its recommendations were too bold, too imaginative, and too challenging of the government orthodoxy to be adopted. While that attitude remains, New Zealand will remain not just geographically small, but I think nationally small. And I, for one, have greater hopes, greater aspirations, and a greater confidence in our national ability than that. We can do better, we have to do better this year, and this year's debate has to be about the mechanisms by which that can occur.
Rodney Hyde.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question for the Prime Minister.